On that cloudy Saturday morning, everything seemed to be going as it always had. The automatic gate opened with the same sound as always, and the silence of the still sleeping streets enveloped the neighborhood like a warm blanket. Jonas Araujo, 48, a criminal lawyer with an untouchable reputation in the city, walked across the living room with slow steps and a distant look in his eyes. He hadn't slept properly in weeks. Ever since his mother was diagnosed with moderate-stage Alzheimer's, he had to change his routine, adapt the house, and make room for the unexpected, including within himself. With his suit hanging behind the bedroom door and his tie loose around his neck, Jonas had the look of someone who had accumulated more than just lawsuits. He was carrying years of silence. The living room was spacious and well decorated, but there was a coldness in every object that not even the sun could warm. And on that particular morning, something in the air seemed different, as if that were the day when the past, with all its wounds, would knock on the door without asking permission. The newly hired caregiver, Lucia, arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, as agreed. She had small eyes, hair tied in a tight bun, and a way of walking that seemed to be always measuring the floor. Since she had started there 3 weeks ago, she had maintained an impeccable routine with Donna Olga, Jonas's mother. But there was something about Lucia that bothered him. She spoke little, observed a lot, and never let a word out of place slip out. That morning, when Jonas came downstairs and saw her in the kitchen making coffee, he felt a slight shiver on the back of his neck. "Good morning, Doctor," she said, without looking directly at him. "Your mother woke up talking about some things from the past. I think you should listen." Jonas froze, because there are things that even after decades buried, never lose their power to poke at the conscience, especially when God decides it's a time to confront the ghosts. And that Saturday, all Jonas wanted most was to forget. But the cloudy sky seemed to whisper that forgetting was about to end. Lucia was sitting next to the old flowered armchair when Jonas entered the room. Donna Olga stared at the window as if she saw something outside that wasn't there. Her eyes, sometimes cloudy from illness, at that moment seemed clear, almost lucid. "He arrived covered in blood, Jonas. You were just a boy, and you lied for him." The words cut through the silence like a forgotten razor on the skin. Jonas stopped in the doorway, unable to move a muscle. It wasn't the first time his mother had said incoherent things, but that sentence didn't come out of thin air. He knew exactly what she was talking about. Lucia looked at him seriously. "She told me that yesterday too. She said that your brother came back that night, that you hid something in the shed." Jonas tried to react, but his breathing was heavy. His brother Daniel had disappeared 20 years ago, and the shed at the back of his father's house had remained locked ever since. No one had ever spoken about it again. Not him, not his mother, not God. Jonas sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. Olga didn't take her eyes off the window. "He cried, son. He cried so much. You said it was just a fight, but I saw the blood on your shoe." The pain of the memory came back with cruel clarity. It was the summer of 2005. Daniel, his older brother, had shown up at home, late at night, running away from something he'd never explained properly. The two of them had argued. Daniel was distraught, and then everything went blank. Jonas closed his eyes and felt his throat close up. Lucia pressed her fingers together on the dishcloth in her lap. "She's not making it up. She remembers details. She said there was a cloth with letters embroidered on it, burned in the corner." The cloth. The tablecloth from the living room. Jonas shivered. No one outside the family knew about it, and if his mother remembered even between the lapses of illness, that was not just a memory. It was a confession. And on that Saturday, it seemed that everything was ready to come to the surface, including what he had buried inside himself with the promise of never digging it up again. It was in the midst of that silent tension, still amidst the unspoken memories, that the intercom rang. Jonas stood up as if by instinct, happy to be interrupted, even though he didn't know who it was. He opened the gate without asking, thinking it was a grocery delivery, but the one who came in was Julia, the daughter of the neighbor across the street, 13 years old, and with a look that was more mature than it should be for her age. "Hi, Uncle Jonas. My mother said she forgot her wallet here last week. Can I come in for a bit?" He nodded, disconcerted, and she went straight to the living room, as if she already knew the way. But instead of looking for the wallet, she sat on the couch and stared at him. "I saw you that night. The one with the heavy rain. When you got home all dirty, I was at my bedroom window." Jonas turned pale, his throat dried out like a leaf forgotten in the sun. "What night, Julia?" He tried to hide it, but she didn't back down. "The one with the thunder. You looked both ways before you came in. I remember." Jonas's heart was pounding. There was no way she could know. And yet, she knew. The silence that formed in the room was so dense that it could almost be touched. Jonas took a deep breath, trying to search deep in his mind for some rational explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe a childish imagination. But Julia didn't seem to be joking. She lowered her gaze for a moment and murmured, "I was scared. I thought you had hurt someone." Jonas felt his legs weaken. He thought about saying it was a lie, that the girl must have gotten confused, but part of him was tired of running away. That morning had started like any other, but it was revealing itself as a slow, painful, divine summons to the truth. Lucia, who was watching everything from the door, crossed her arms with the same look as before, not one of judgment, but of someone who knows that justice, sooner or later, demands justice. Jonas stood up, ran his hand over his face, and looked at Julia with a sincerity he hadn't used in years. "Do you remember anything else from that night?" She nodded. "I remember you cried, alone, in the backyard. And you apologized to someone who wasn't there." Jonas left the room as if he were running away from a weight he could no longer carry. He climbed the stairs slowly, entered his room, and closed the door carefully. Inside, he sat on the floor with his back to the wall, as he had done when he was a teenager and didn't want anyone to see him cry. And there, in that silence interrupted only by the distant sound of a cartoon coming from the living room, he allowed himself to remember. The image of his brother Daniel, bloodied, confused, with his eyes asking for help. And he, Jonas, was afraid of losing his career, his family, the life he had barely begun to build. That night, after everything, he had cleaned up the evidence, hidden what he could, and swore to himself that it would die with him, and it did. Or almost, because now, like an inevitable harvest, everything was coming to light. His mother remembered. The girl knew, and there was something worse than the secret. The lie he had lived for so many years. Jonas closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he prayed. "Lord, I don't know how to fix it, but if you still want to use me, show me where to start." The answer did not come as a miracle nor as a sudden light, but it did come, silently, like an internal whisper. "Start by asking for forgiveness." He went downstairs again, and with his eyes still moist, called Julia to the door. "Can you call your mother, please? I need to talk to her." The girl left in a hurry, and in the meantime, Lucia approached. "I believe that God does not let things appear by chance, Doctor. Sometimes we think we are hiding, but heaven sees everything." Jonas nodded, unable to say anything. When Anna Paula, the neighbor, appeared at the door with a worried expression, Jonas invited her in and bluntly told the truth, or part of it. He said that something from the past was coming back and that her daughter had seen more than she should have. He apologized. He promised that if she allowed it, he would talk to Julia, explain it better with respect. Anna, despite being startled, was understanding. "She's smart, Jonas, and I always thought there was something in your eyes. Now I understand what it is. Just be careful not to hurt someone who isn't to blame even more." Later, close to noon, when the sky began to slowly open up between heavy clouds, Jonas received an unexpected call. The number was unknown, but the voice on the other end of the line was unmistakable. "Jonas, it's Daniel." The world seemed to stop for a second. The words disappeared from his mouth, and all he could manage was, "Is it really you?" His brother responded with a muffled, tired laugh. "It's me, and I'm back. I need to talk to you." 20 years without hearing that voice, and now it appeared like this, out of nowhere, as if the hands of time were turning back. Jonas wrote down the address he gave, a small room in a boarding house in the northern part of the city, and promised to meet him. That day, Lucia, who had heard part of the conversation in the kitchen, simply murmured, "God is sorting everything out, Doctor. But don't think it's going to be easy." Jonas knew this. He knew that revealing the truth was like turning a key that could never be locked again. But something in his chest was beginning to shift, a kind of courage that comes when fear finally gives way to regret. Before leaving, Jonas passed by his mother's room. Olga slept peacefully, her lips parted and her white hair spread across the pillow. He knelt beside the bed and held her hand, wrinkled and fragile. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have told you. For me, for you, for him." There was no answer, but a silent tear ran down her face, as if her spirit was still listening to what her mind no longer followed. As he left the house, Jonas saw Julia drawing on the sidewalk with colored chalk. Simple drawings, a house, a sun, 3 figures holding hands. He recognized the pattern. It was like the drawing his own son had made when he was little. But Jonas had no children, at least not officially, and that image hit him like a second revelation. He remembered the woman he had had a brief relationship with, still early in his marriage to Clara, his ex-wife. He remembered the forgotten message in an old email account, discovered years later, and he remembered with pain having ignored what could have been the beginning of a new life, a son or a daughter who might still be waiting for him somewhere. On the way to the boarding house where Daniel was staying, Jonas drove in silence, with the window half open and his heart pounding. Every block he crossed seemed to tear deeper the barrier he had created within himself for 2 decades. When he stopped at a traffic light, he looked in the back seat and saw the old envelope he had kept since his divorce from Clara. There were court papers, some letters never sent, and a photograph, a smiling woman holding a baby in her arms. The name on the back of the photo said, "Lucas, 1-year-old." Jonas was never sure, but now, after everything that was coming to light, he could no longer ignore it. He picked up his cell phone and searched for an old contact, saved with the initials CS. He took a deep breath and sent a short message. "Clara, we need to talk. It's about Lucas. If he's my son, I want to meet him." He pressed send with trembling fingers and focused on the road again. God wasn't just lifting the veil from the past. He was showing that the time for hiding was over. When Jonas arrived at the boarding house, he found Daniel sitting on the back porch with the same expression he had when they were teenagers. Restless eyes, hands clenched, as if he was always expecting the worst. But there was something different now. Daniel was thinner, with tired lines on his face and a beard, but his gaze still carried the same appeal from years ago. "You're back," Jonas said, not knowing where to begin. Daniel nodded. "I'm tired of running away. But before anything else, I need to thank you. I remember that night you saved me. You could have given me up." Jonas sat down slowly, as if carrying a weight that no longer fits on his shoulders. "And I need to ask you for forgiveness, for hiding everything, for pretending you didn't exist. I buried you with that secret, Daniel." The brother smiled sadly. "I buried myself, Jonas. But maybe there's still time for us to get through this together." And there, on that porch, forgotten by time, two brothers broken by guilt began to find their way back home and to God. Back home, the mood was different. The afternoon was advancing with a golden light coming through the curtains, and for the first time in years, Jonas felt time moving slowly. He entered slowly, feeling the weight of the journey on his body, but with a strangely light soul. He found Lucia in the living room with a cup of tea in her hands and her eyes attentive to the news, which talked about justice, scandals, and secrets being revealed. She turned off the television as soon as she saw him. "Was it difficult?" she asked gently. Jonas nodded. "But necessary. Everything is coming to light. A son I never knew, a brother I almost lost, a mother who still sees me as the boy who lied. But I'm here." Lucia smiled. "And sometimes being here whole is already a miracle." Jonas sat down next to her and for the first time allowed himself to talk about everything, without rushing, without fear. The truth was beginning to take shape, and with it, peace. Late in the afternoon, a notification flashed on his cell phone. Message from Clara. With trembling hands, Jonas opened the chat. The answer came directly, but full of weight. "Yes, he is your son, always has been. I tried to tell you, but you had already gone another way. I didn't want to get in the way. His name is Lucas, he's 14, and I've always wanted to meet you." The world stopped for a moment. Jonas stared at those words, as if staring at a half-open door, to a new and at the same time familiar world. He thought about everything he had lost, but felt there was still time to start over. He replied with his heart in his fingers, "I want to meet him. Tell me when and where, and tell me his father is ready." As he sent the message, a silent tear ran down his face. But it was different from the others. It didn't come from pain. It was hope. Hope that even after so many mistakes, there is always a chance, when truth aligns with grace. At night, as the sky grew dark with silent clouds and a gentle wind blew through the trees on the street, Jonas walked through the front yard. His steps were slow, his hands in his pockets, and his heart was full of questions. But for the first time in many years, it was also full of faith. Julia was still on the sidewalk, now with her mother by her side, and she waved to him with a shy smile. Jonas walked through the gate, approached the two of them, and bent down to speak directly to the girl. "You know, that drawing you made earlier today?" he asked. She nodded, her eyes alive. "That family holding hands. Can you give it to me? I want to keep it." Julia smiled and ran to the notebook, returning with the paper crumpled at the corners. He received it as if holding a relic. Anna Paula watched in silence, touched by something she couldn't explain. Jonas thanked her, looked at the girl and said, "You saw more than you should have, but you also saw what I could no longer see. Thank you for that." Inside the house, Lucia was clearing the dinner table when the doorbell rang. Jonas went to answer it, expecting perhaps the doorman or a neighbor. But the person there was Clara, with teary eyes and her son by her side. Lucas. The boy had brown hair like his and the same observant eyes. Jonas froze for a moment, not knowing what to say, but the boy broke the silence. "Hi, I'm Lucas." He smiled a little awkwardly. Jonas felt the world spin slowly. and I'm your father." The sentence came, out as a whisper but full of meaning. Clara looked at the two of them with a mixture of pain and relief. He insisted on coming today. He said he didn't want to wait any longer. Jonas opened the gate and invited them in. For the first time, that house was starting to feel like home, a place of reunions, of adjustments and new beginnings. And deep down, Jonas knew everything was falling apart so that it could be rebuilt with more truth, more faith, and more love. Lucas walked around the room with contained curiosity, looking at the picture frames, the books on the shelf, the old piano covered by a beige blanket. "Do you play?" he asked, pointing to the instrument. Jonas smiled. "I used to. My father taught me when I was about your age." The boy approached, lifted the blanket, and let his fingers slide gently over the keys. The sound that came out was timid, but pure. Clara watched standing, with her hands clasped and her eyes shining in silence. Lucia appeared in the hallway, surprised to see the two visitors, but soon understood everything. Jonas introduced her with an affectionate gesture. "This is Lucia. She takes care of my mother." Lucas turned to her politely. "Hi." Lucia just smiled. "Hi, pretty boy." It was as if everyone there was dancing between strangeness and connection, a first encounter where souls recognize each other before words. The dinner was improvised, but full of grace. Clara accepted the invitation to stay a little longer, and Lucia, without anyone asking, prepared a hot soup, slices of garlic bread and orange juice. They all sat at the table like a family that, even without a common past, sought a shared gift. Donna Olga, awake and somewhat confused, also came, brought by Lucia. When she saw Lucas, she frowned. "That boy looks like Jonas when he was little." Jonas swallowed hard. Clara smiled sweetly. "He is." For a moment, no one knew what to say, but the silence was light, as if heaven itself was there, sewing the broken pieces, together with threads of mercy. At the end of the meal, Lucas helped to clear the plates and before leaving, asked something that Jonas did not expect. "Tomorrow, can I come back? I would like to know more about your story. And maybe play the piano again." Jonas held back the urge to cry. "You can, and you don't have to ask." The seed of a new beginning was planted. When Clara and Lucas said goodbye that night, the street was almost deserted, and the clear sky revealed a few timid stars, twinkling between the wires of the power grid. Jonas accompanied them to the gate and stood there, watching as they slowly walked away, as if time had finally come to a peaceful end. When he returned inside, he went straight to his office, opened the bottom drawer of his desk, and took out an old envelope yellowed by the decades. It was the letter left by his father before he died, which he had never had the courage to read in its entirety. He sat down in the armchair, took a deep breath, and began. "Son, if you are reading this, it is because you are a grown man, and I hope you have learned to forgive others and yourself. I have made mistakes too, Jonas. Many. And perhaps you already know which ones. But above all, I want you to know that love always finds a way to come home." His father's words seemed to be written for that exact moment, and Jonas felt something change inside him. An old scar was finally beginning to heal. The next morning, the day dawned with a clear and serene light, as if even the sky wanted to collaborate with the new weather. Jonas woke up early, made coffee for himself and Lucia, and then took a tray to his mother's room. Donna Olga was awake, but calm, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as if waiting for an answer. "Mom, I'm going to visit Daniel today. He's back." She turned her face slowly and, for the first time in a long time, squeezed her son's hand tightly. "Take care of him, Jonas. He needs it more than you can imagine." Jonas nodded with tears in his eyes. He went down to the backyard, past the old shed, still locked with the rusty chain, and stopped in front of the door. He took the key from his pocket, hesitated for a moment, and then unlocked it. The smell of old wood and forgotten time invaded the air. It was time to face the past in its entirety. Inside, among the boxes, tools, and muffled memories, was everything he had avoided for 2 decades. But now he was no longer afraid, because when God decides to heal, he doesn't leave anything half done. In the shadows of the shed, Jonas found the wooden box where he had kept Daniel's belongings on that fateful night. With trembling hands, he removed one by one the items covered by a dusty blanket, a stained jacket, a pair of torn sneakers, and a small black-covered Bible with the name Daniel A. Araujo engraved in gold. That paralyzed him. He had never known his brother to read the Bible. He opened it at random and found a note on the back cover. Even in the valley the Lord sees me, Psalm 23. It was impossible to hold back his tears. Jonas knelt on the cold floor of the shed, and there, between past and present, whispered a prayer he had not said in years. Lord, I surrender. I made mistakes. I hid. I ran away. But I am here. I no longer want to live under the weight of what happened. Guide me, God. Teach me to be a father. Teach me to be a brother. Teach me to be yours. And like someone handing over a burden, Jonah finally felt the peace that came from leaving control in the hands of the Creator. Late that afternoon, Daniel arrived at Jonas's house. He was carrying a small backpack and a calmer look on his face. Lucia made a strong coffee, just like the 2 brothers had enjoyed as children, and left them alone on the porch. Jonas told them everything about Clara, Lucas, Julia, and even about his mother, who now remembered more than he had forgotten. Daniel listened in silence, his eyes filling with tears. When Jonas mentioned the box in the shed, he simply said, "You did what you thought was right. I didn't know how to pray back then, but that Bible, it was the only thing that kept me alive on those nights of escape." There was a moment of silence between them. Then Daniel said something that Jonas would never forget. "Maybe we wasted a lot of time, brother, but I believe that God always has a way back. We just need to have the courage to walk it." Jonas held back his tears. "And I'm ready to walk with you, Daniel." This time, side by side, and the 2 embraced as if they were reunited after a long war. Sunday dawned with the smell of warm bread and the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. Jonas went downstairs and found Clara making coffee next to Lucia, while Lucas and Julia played dominoes in the living room. Daniel watched everything from the door with the look of someone still getting used to the idea of peace. It was a simple, everyday scene, but to Jonas it seemed like a miracle in motion. That house, so long cold and silent, now breathed life. God gave us back more than we deserved, he thought, feeling something in his chest that he couldn't name, but that seemed very much like gratitude. Donna Olga also came down, supported by Lucia, and when she saw everyone together, she smiled with a rare sparkle in her eyes. "This is how it should have always been," she murmured, sitting down carefully. Jonas approached, kissed her forehead, and replied tenderly, "There's still time, Mom," because he now understood that as long as there's breath, there's a new beginning, and God always finds a way to restore what the world has broken. After breakfast, they decided to go to church together. Clara hesitated at first, but Lucas insisted, and that simple gesture was already a sign. They dressed calmly, each carrying their own doubts, their own guilt, but all open to something new. The church was a few blocks away, a modest building with light walls and open windows, where the wooden benches held stories from generations ago. When they entered, they were greeted with smiles and hugs by people who knew Jonas only as the respected lawyer of the city. and now saw him differently, more human, more whole. During the worship service, Lucas held his father's hand and sang softly. Jonas, with his eyes closed, let the tears flow without shame. There was nothing left to hide. And when the pastor asked if anyone wanted to give their life to Christ or pick up where they left off, Jonas stood up, and Daniel too, and Clara right after. It was like a silent wave of liberation washing over every soul in that pew. At that moment, everyone knew. What began as a settling of accounts had become a reunion with God Himself. After the service, they walked back home together down the street, like a family that was being rebuilt step by step, without rushing. Lucas held his father's hand tightly, as if he knew that this gesture marked the beginning of a new story. Clara walked beside Daniel, listening attentively as he told her about the places he had been, the temporary jobs, the nights spent homeless, the encounters with people who had helped him when he had already given up on himself. Julia, further back, talked to Lucia about the plants in the garden and how she was going to start writing a diary, because there are things that we need to keep in a beautiful way. Jonas just watched it all with a discreet smile, as if he were thanking her without needing to say it. The clouds moved slowly across the blue sky, and the wind blew lightly through the trees. Nothing grand, but everything was deeply true. This was how grace manifested itself, in the details, in the simple gestures, in the ordinary that transforms when the heart opens. That afternoon, Jonas decided to write a letter. He sat down at his desk, opened his old brown notebook, and began to pour out onto the paper everything he had previously kept silent. He wrote to Lucas so that one day he would understand his father's story with all his flaws and hopes. He wrote to Clara, thanking her for never having completely closed the door. He wrote to Daniel, apologizing once again and reaffirming that blood ties are not fragile when watered with forgiveness. And finally he wrote to God, Father, today I understand that hiding sin does not erase it, but confessing it before you transforms it. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for leading me back. He closed the notebook with steady hands and a peaceful heart. He knew that the path would still have obstacles, but now he was no longer alone. Now there was faith, there was love, there was truth, and above all, there was hope. Dusk arrived with golden hues spread across the walls of the house, and the aroma of cornmeal cake wafted through the kitchen, made by Clara with the help of Julia and Lucas. Lucia watched everyone with attentive eyes and restrained affection, and even Mrs. Olga, between one memory and another, smiled, with the naturalness of someone who feels that the world has started to turn at the right rhythm again. Daniel played the piano delicately, remembering old melodies from his childhood, and Jonas accompanied him, whistling softly as they used to do when they were boys. There, in that simple room, something was born that could not be bought or faked, the feeling of home. Not the perfect home, but the true home, where everyone had space to be who they were, with their pains and stories, their scars and renewed faith. Jonas felt that God had not only allowed that new beginning, but had sustained him until then with invisible and firm hands. And that was enough. That night, before going to sleep, Jonas knelt beside his bed and prayed, simple but complete words. Lord, thank you for reaching out to me, for breaking me and rebuilding me, for showing me that love doesn't end when you make a mistake, but begins again when you surrender. Then he walked to Lucas's room, where the boy was already lying, staring at the ceiling. He sat on the edge of the bed and asked, "Can I pray with you?" Lucas nodded in surprise, and they both closed their eyes. Jonas prayed for his son, for his life, for his future. He asked God to help him be the father he deserved. When he finished, Lucas said softly, "I've waited so long for this day, and it was worth it." Jonas smiled, his eyes moist. "I've waited too, son, longer than I can say." And at that moment, without spectacular miracles or bright lights, heaven descended upon that house, like a whisper of peace that only God can grant. The next morning, the house woke up slowly, with the first rays of sunlight coming through the cracks in the window and the soft sounds of the city taking shape. Jonas went downstairs in silence and found Daniel on the porch with a cup of coffee in his hands and the old Bible resting on his lap. "I woke up early. I couldn't sleep much," he said, smiling. Jonas sat down next to him and they stayed there, together without speaking for a few minutes, just listening to the birds, feeling the wind and letting the silence do what words couldn't. "Do you know what impresses me the most?" Daniel commented. "It's that God doesn't just forgive, He restores. And He does it using the very parts of us that we most want to hide." Jonas nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that truth echo in his chest. "It's as if He uses our broken pieces to reflect more light," he added. Daniel smiled. "That's beautiful. I'll write it down." It was the kind of conversation that only brothers who have been through a valley together could have. As the following days unfolded, their bonds grew stronger, like roots finding fertile soil after a long drought. Lucas and Julia became inseparable friends. Clara returned to church with ease and faith, and Lucia, who had always been more than just a caregiver, was now seen as part of the family. Donna Olga, despite her troubles, began to rejoice in the movement of the house and, from time to time, would say phrases that conveyed ancient wisdom. Jonas gradually returned to work, but with a different outlook on life. Less rush, more presence. One day, sitting on the church bench next to Lucas and Clara, he saw his son raise his hand during the service and say he wanted to be baptized. The tears came naturally, effortlessly. There, faced with everything that had been restored, Jonas understood, finally, that God does not fix things like someone who patches them. He rebuilds them like someone who loves, in the right way, with time, with grace, and above all, with purpose. Months later, on a clear afternoon with a gentle breeze, Jonas's house hosted a small celebration in the backyard, Lucas's baptism. It was an intimate gathering, attended only by family and close friends. The makeshift pond was decorated with simple flowers picked from the garden, and a small hymn filled the air with notes of peace. Clara, moved, held Jonas's hands while the pastor prayed. Daniel, standing next to Lucia and Donna Olga, could not take his eyes off his nephew. When Lucas emerged from the water, smiling with his eyes closed, Jonas was certain that this was the most important moment of his life. Nothing that money, status, or reputation could offer compared to what he felt at that moment: redemption, reconciliation, love. He looked up to the sky and silently thanked God. "Thank you, Father. You have made everything new." And somehow he felt that the sky was smiling back. That same night, after the guests had left and the yard had fallen silent, Jonas collected the last glasses with Clara and Daniel. Julia, tired from the joy, was sleeping on the couch with a sketchbook on her lap. Lucas was already in his room, reading one of the old books he had found on his father's bookshelf. Jonas allowed himself to sit on the porch once more, as he had done so many times over the months. But now, there was no weight on his shoulders, no fear in his eyes. He was whole, healed. All around him, people who had once seemed lost now belonged. God, with his firm gentleness, had written a new story about the old one. And Jonas knew that even if the past could not be erased, he had been redeemed. And that was the true victory. The last breeze of the night passed lightly like a whisper, and the narrator of life, the one who sees all, knows all, and restores all, smiled in silence. Because where there is truth, there is freedom. Where there is love, there is home. And where there is faith, there will always be a new beginning.